The sun beat down mercilessly on Lorelai Bennett as she stood at the edge of the dusty road, her threadbare carpet bag at her feet. The stagecoach that had carried her family away was nothing but a disappearing cloud on the horizon. They'd left her behind without so much as a backward glance, abandoned like unwanted baggage at the frontier town of Silverdale Creek. "We'll come back for you, Lorelai," her father had promised, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Once we're settled in California. Just need to lighten our load for the journey." Lorelai knew the truth. At 22, she was a burden too old to marry well according to her stepmother, too headstrong for her own good, and with her leg that had never healed right after the fever 5 years ago, she'd only slow them down. The California gold fields called to her father with promises of wealth, and his new wife wouldn't tolerate Lorelai's presence any longer. The year was 1873, and for a woman alone in the West, prospects were few and grim. Silverdale Creek, Colorado Territory, was little more than a clutch of wooden buildings straddling the trail that led toward the mountains. The stagecoach station, a saloon, a general store, and a handful of other establishments made up the town's meager offerings. Beyond them lay open country, beautiful, dangerous, and utterly indifferent to her plight. "Well," she whispered to herself, "you've got exactly $3.42 to your name, Lorelai Bennett. Best make something of it." She picked up her bag, adjusted her faded blue dress, and limped toward the general store. Perhaps they would know of work for a woman who could read, write, cipher, and sew a decent stitch. Her options were limited, but Lorelai had learned long ago that survival required adaptability. The store's bell jingled as she entered, and the proprietor, a round-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, miss?" "I hope so, sir. I'm in need of employment." "I can keep books, serve customers, clean, ain't hiring," he cut her off, returning to his ledger. "Try the saloon, they might need a girl." Her cheeks burned. "I'm looking for respectable work, sir." The man shrugged without looking up. "Beggars can't be choosers in these parts, miss." Lorelai straightened her spine. "Thank you for your time." She exited the store, fighting back tears of frustration. The sun was beginning its westward descent, and she needed shelter before nightfall. Clutching her bag tighter, she made her way toward the stagecoach station, hoping it might offer a bench where she could rest. As she approached, the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider was approaching from the east, his form silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Lorelai stepped aside to let him pass, but to her surprise, the horseman slowed and then stopped beside her. "Afternoon, miss," came a deep voice. She looked up, shielding her eyes. The man atop the chestnut stallion was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust coated his denim pants and leather vest, telling of many miles traveled. "Good afternoon," she replied cautiously. He studied her for a moment, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the small bag at her feet. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Waiting for someone?" he asked. Lorelai swallowed hard. "No, sir, I was just left here." "Left," his brow furrowed. "My family. They continued west without me." The admission felt like swallowing broken glass. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with a strong jaw dusted with stubble and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "You're not left anymore," he said simply, his voice carrying a certainty that made her breath catch. "I beg your pardon. Name's Quentin Reed," he said, extending a hand. "Got a ranch about 10 miles north of here. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, just took ill and returned to her sister's in Denver. I'm in need of someone to cook and keep house." Lorelai hesitated. A strange man offering her work at his isolated ranch could spell danger. "I can pay $8 a month plus room and board," he continued, seeming to read her wariness. "You'd have your own cabin, small but private, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you'd be treated with respect. Why would you offer employment to a complete stranger?" She asked, still suspicious. Something like kindness flickered across his face. "Because 14 years ago I was left behind too. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most." He paused. "What's your name, Miss Lorelai Bennett?" Well, Miss Bennett, I'm offering you honest work. Take it or leave it, but night's coming on, and Silverdale Creek isn't kind to those without means. He was right. Her options were vanishingly few, and the approaching dusk carried with it a chill that reminded her of her precarious situation. I accept your offer, Mr. Reed, she said finally. Though I should tell you I walk with a limp, it won't affect my work, but I thought you should know. He nodded once. Can you cook? Yes. Can you read and write? Very well. Then your leg is of no concern to me. He reached for her bag. May I? She relinquished it, and he secured it to his saddle before turning back to her. Ever ridden, Miss Bennett? Not since I was a child. Without further comment, he placed his hands at her waist and lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness. Then he mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still ensuring she wouldn't fall. Hold the pommel, he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. As they rode away from Silverdale Creek, Lorelai felt equal measures of relief and trepidation. She was placing her fate in the hands of a stranger, but somehow his steady presence at her back made her feel safer than she had in years. Mr. Reed, she ventured after they'd ridden in silence for some time. Yes, thank you. He made a non-committal sound in response, but she felt rather than saw his nod. The land opened before them, rolling hills giving way to pine forests with the distant mountains etched against the darkening sky. It was beautiful in its wildness, and despite everything, Lorelai felt a flutter of hope stir within her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, being left behind wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning. The Reed Ranch came into view as the last light faded from the sky, a sturdy main house built of logs and stone, a large barn, and several outbuildings scattered across a clearing backed by forest. A creek ran along one side of the property, its waters catching the first glimmer of moonlight. This is all yours. Lorelai couldn't keep the awe from her voice. 600 acres, Quentin replied. Started with 20 and a handful of cattle, built it up over 12 years. They rode past a corral where several horses lifted their heads to watch their approach. A dog, some sort of shepherd mix, bounded out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. That's Ranger, Quentin said. He's friendly. He guided his horse to a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house. It was simple but well-maintained, with a small porch and chimney. This will be yours, he said, dismounting before helping her down. Her legs wobbled after the long ride, and his hands lingered at her waist just long enough to ensure she was steady. I'll light the lamps and stove for you. Lorelai followed him inside, where he quickly brought the cabin to life with light and warmth. It was a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small table with 2 chairs, a cooking stove, and shelves for provisions. Simple, but far better than she had dared hope for. There's food in the pantry, he explained, indicating a small door. Enough for tonight and breakfast. Tomorrow I'll show you around properly and explain your duties. Thank you, Mr. Reed. This is more than generous, he shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest, Miss Bennett. We start early here. After he left, Lorelai sank onto the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had gone from abandoned and destitute to housed and employed in the span of hours. Whether this twist of fate was a blessing or something else remained to be seen. But for tonight at least, she had shelter, security, and the promise of a new day. She fell asleep to the distant howl of coyotes and the comforting crackle of the stove, dreaming of blue eyes and a deep voice saying, "You're not left anymore." Dawn arrived with a gentle knock at her door. Lorelai, already dressed in her second-best dress, a faded green cotton with minimal mending, opened it to find Quentin Reed holding a basket. "Morning," he said, his eyes quickly taking in her appearance. "Brought fresh eggs and milk. Thought you might want to get settled before coming up to the main house." "That's thoughtful, thank you." She accepted the basket, noting the addition of a loaf of bread. "Did you bake this?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "One of my few culinary talents." "That and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in." "I look forward to trying both," she replied, surprising herself with the easy banter. "I'll come back in an hour to show you around," he said, already turning to leave. "There's a well behind your cabin for water." True to his word, Quentin returned as Lorelai was finishing a simple breakfast of eggs and bread. The food had revived her spirits considerably, and she felt ready to face whatever the day might bring. The tour of the ranch was comprehensive. The main house was larger than it had appeared in the darkness, a two-story structure with a spacious kitchen, dining room, sitting room, and Quentin's study downstairs, and bedrooms above. It was furnished simply, but with quality pieces that spoke of careful selection rather than ostentation. "You'll take your meals with me," he explained as they walked through the kitchen. "I prefer breakfast at sunrise, dinner at midday, and supper at dusk, nothing fancy required. And my other duties?" she asked, mentally cataloging the kitchen's organization. "Cooking, cleaning, laundry once a week. I handle the ranch business and correspondence myself, but if you're willing, there are ledgers that could use organizing. I'd be happy to help with that." He led her outside to show her the rest of the property, the barn where he kept his best horses and tack, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and the vegetable garden that needed tending. "2 ranch hands live in the bunkhouse," he explained, pointing to a building on the far side of the barn. "Samuel's been with me 8 years, Luke for 3. Good men, but they take their meals separately unless it's a special occasion." As they walked, Lorelai noticed more details about her employer. Despite his imposing height and the weathered look of a man who worked outdoors, there was a carefulness to his movements around her, a deliberate gentleness that put her at ease. His clothes, while practical, were of good quality, and he spoke with the education of someone who had at least some schooling. "You mentioned yesterday that you were left behind once," she ventured as they made their way back toward the houses. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a story for another time, Miss Bennett. Of course, I apologize for prying." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "No apology needed. We all have histories we don't care to revisit." His eyes met hers directly. "I don't need to know why your family left you behind, and you don't need to know my past. What matters is the work at hand and treating each other with respect." "Agreed, Mr. Reed." The days settled into a rhythm at the Reed Ranch. Lorelai rose with the sun, prepared breakfast, and worked through her daily tasks with a diligence that seemed to satisfy her employer. Quentin was often gone for hours, riding his land, checking cattle, or handling business in nearby towns. When present, he was polite but reserved, joining her for meals with minimal conversation before returning to his duties. The ranch hands, Samuel and Luke, kept their distance, but were respectful when their paths crossed. Samuel was an older man with a weathered face and a permanent squint from years in the sun. Luke was younger, perhaps 25, with a ready smile and a tendency to whistle while he worked. As the first week passed into the second, Lorelai found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. Her cabin became a sanctuary, decorated with wildflowers she picked during brief walks. The physical labor was demanding but satisfying, and for the first time in years she felt useful. One evening, as she served a supper of rabbit stew and cornbread, Quentin broke their comfortable silence. "The ledgers in my study need attention," he said, buttering a slice of bread. "If you've time tomorrow, I'd appreciate your help." "Of course," she replied, pleased by the request. "I'm quite good with figures. So I gathered from the inventory list you made for the pantry, very thorough." She felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you." The next morning found her in his study, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "These need to be reconciled," Quentin explained, placing several leather-bound ledgers before her. "Cattle sales, supply purchases, wages paid." "I understand," she said, already opening the first book. "How detailed would you like the reconciliation?" He looked mildly surprised by the question. "You've done this kind of work before. My father was a merchant before he caught gold fever." "I kept his books since I was 16. A flicker of something respect perhaps crossed his face. "Then I'll leave it to your judgment." He worked at the far end of the desk while she tackled the ledgers, the silence broken only by the scratch of pens and the occasional turning of pages. It was companionable in a way Lorelai hadn't expected, After an hour, she looked up to find him watching her, his expression unreadable. "Is something wrong, Mr. Reed?" "No," he said, returning his attention to his work. "Just noting that you don't complain about your leg, even when you've been standing too long." Lorelai stiffened. "Does it interfere with my work?" "Not at all. It shows character." She wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and returned to the ledgers. But something had shifted between them, a small acknowledgement of mutual respect that lingered in the air. As spring deepened into summer, the days grew longer and warmer. Lorelai expanded the vegetable garden, adding herbs and flowers that brought color to the property. She took to reading on her porch in the evenings, borrowing books from Quentin's surprisingly extensive library. One such evening, as the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and pink, Quentin approached her cabin. He carried 2 cups and a bottle of what appeared to be whiskey. "Evening, Miss Bennett," he greeted her. "Thought you might enjoy some company and a nightcap." Surprised but pleased, she set aside her book. "That would be lovely." He settled into the second chair on her porch and poured a small measure of amber liquid into each cup. "It's my birthday," he said by way of explanation. 34 today. "Happy birthday, Mr. Reed," she said, accepting the cup. "I wish I'd known. I would have baked a cake." A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his features. "This is celebration enough." They sipped in companionable silence for a while, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "May I ask you something, Mr. Reed?" "Quentin," he corrected her. "After hours, at least." "Quentin," she tested the name. "And you should call me Lorelai," he nodded. "What's your question?" "Why do you live out here alone, a man with your means and—" She hesitated. Attributes could surely have found a wife by now. He considered the question, turning his cup in his hands. "I was engaged once. 8 years ago. Elizabeth was a banker's daughter from Denver. Beautiful, educated, everything a man could want. What happened? She came to visit the ranch, stayed 2 weeks. His voice grew distant. On the day she was to return to Denver, she told me she couldn't marry a man who lived in such primitive conditions. Said she'd been raised for better things than to be a rancher's wife." "I'm sorry," Lorelai said softly. He shrugged. "She was right about one thing: this life isn't for everyone. It's hard, often lonely, but it's mine and I've built it from nothing." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "What about you? No suitors before your family left?" Lorelai gave a short, humorless laugh. "Not after the fever took my looks and left me with this limp. My stepmother made it quite clear I was damaged goods." "Your stepmother sounds like a fool," he said sharply. The bluntness of his response startled her. "I beg your pardon. Anyone who can't see your worth beyond a limp is blind as well as foolish." Heat rose to her cheeks and she looked away, unsure how to respond to the unexpected compliment. "Thank you," she managed finally. They finished their drinks as full darkness descended, the night alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. "I should let you rest," Quentin said, rising from his chair. "Thank you for sharing my birthday with me, Lorelai." "Thank you for the company," she replied. "And the whiskey." He collected the cups and bottle, then paused. Would you care to ride with me tomorrow? There's a part of the property I think you might enjoy seeing." "I'd like that very much." After he left, Lorelai remained on the porch, her thoughts swirling like the stars above. Something was changing between them, a slow, cautious shift from employer and employee toward something she wasn't quite ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Lorelai dressed carefully in her best dress, a blue calico that brought out her eyes, and pinned her hair in a simple but flattering style. She was just finishing breakfast when Quentin arrived with 2 horses in tow. "This is Daisy," he said, indicating a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "She's steady and patient, good for someone who hasn't ridden in a while." He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The contact, brief as it was, left her feeling strangely breathless. They rode at an easy pace, Quentin pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land. He had an unexpected gift for storytelling, his deep voice bringing to life tales of the first settlers, the indigenous peoples who had hunted these lands for generations, and his own struggles to establish the ranch. "There," he said finally, pointing to a rise ahead. "That's where we're headed." They crested the hill to find a view that stole Lorelai's breath away. The land spread before them in a patchwork of greens and golds, with the distant mountains forming a majestic backdrop. A small lake glimmered in the valley below, its surface reflecting the perfect blue of the sky. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "This is the heart of the ranch," Quentin said, his voice soft with pride. "When I first saw this view, I knew this was where I belonged." They dismounted, and he spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag. From it, he also produced a small basket containing bread, cheese, and apples. "A picnic?" Lorelai asked, surprised and delighted. "Thought we might enjoy the view while we eat." They settled on the blanket, the horses grazing nearby. The food was simple but delicious, made better by the spectacular surroundings and the companionship. "How did you come to own this land?" Lorelai asked, curious about the man beside her. Quentin was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might deflect the question as he had before. But then he began to speak, his voice taking on that storytelling quality that she'd come to enjoy. "I was 16 when my father died," he said. "My mother had passed years before. We had a small farm in Missouri, nothing special. My uncle came to collect what little inheritance there was. He wasn't interested in taking in a half-grown boy, so he left me there with the clothes on my back and $5. He paused, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I worked odd jobs, saved every penny, made my way west because I'd heard there was opportunity for those willing to work hard. Ended up in Colorado Territory when I was 20. Worked as a ranch hand, then a foreman, learned everything I could about cattle, horses, land management. And then," Lorelai prompted gently when he fell silent, "and then I met Henry Townsend, old rancher with no children, body failing him. I worked for him for 2 years, did everything from mending fences to negotiating cattle sales. When he died, he left me 20 acres and 10 head of cattle." Quentin's voice softened with memory. "Said I was the son he never had. That was a generous gift. It was everything. I built on what he gave me, acre by acre, cow by cow. There were hard years, drought, harsh winters, cattle thieves, but I persevered." "You've built something remarkable," Lorelai said sincerely. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her face. "Thank you." They stayed on the hillside for hours, talking as they never had before. Quentin shared stories of the early days on the ranch, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. Lorelai told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her mother's death when she was 12, and her father's subsequent remarriage to a woman who had little use for another woman's daughter. As the sun began its westward journey, they reluctantly packed up the remains of their picnic and mounted their horses for the ride back. "Thank you for today," Lorelai said as they approached the ranch. "It was special." "It was," Quentin agreed, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't heard before. That night, lying in her bed, Lorelai reflected on the day and the man who had shared it with her. Quentin Reed was not what she had initially thought, not just a taciturn rancher offering charity to a woman in need, but a man of depth, intelligence, and surprising kindness. A man who, perhaps, saw her as more than just his housekeeper. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. July brought intense heat that baked the land and tested everyone's patience. Lorelai adjusted her schedule to complete the most strenuous chores in the relative cool of early morning, spending afternoons in the shade when possible. Quentin and the ranch hands worked regardless of the temperature, returning to their respective dwellings sunburned and exhausted. One particularly scorching afternoon, Lorelai decided to surprise them with cold lemonade. She'd been hoarding sugar for just such a purpose, and had picked lemons during her last trip to town with Quentin. The men were mending fences in the south pasture, and she set out with a jug and cups, walking slowly to accommodate her limp. The sight that greeted her when she reached them made her pause. Quentin had removed his shirt in the heat, his bronzed torso glistening with sweat as he worked. The play of muscles beneath his skin as he hammered posts into the ground was mesmerizing. Lorelai stood transfixed until Samuel spotted her and called out a greeting. Quentin turned, saw her, and immediately reached for his shirt. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice gruff as he buttoned up. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she managed, willing her blush to subside. "I thought you might appreciate some cold lemonade." The gratitude on all three men's faces was reward enough for her effort. They drank thirstily, praising her thoughtfulness. "This is mighty fine, Miss Bennett," Luke said with his characteristic grin. "Almost makes this heat bearable." "Almost," Samuel agreed, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Quentin said nothing, but his eyes conveyed his appreciation as he handed back his empty cup. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, and despite the heat, Lorelai felt a different kind of warmth spread through her. "I should get back," she said, suddenly flustered. "Supper won't cook itself." "I'll walk with you part way," Quentin said, surprising her. "Need to check on the water level in the creek anyway." They walked in silence for several minutes, the jug swinging lightly in Lorelai's hand. The sun beat down on them mercilessly, but she found she didn't mind as much with him beside her. "That was kind of you," he said finally. "The lemonade, it was nothing. You all work so hard. As do you." He glanced at her, concern evident in his expression. "This heat can't be easy with your leg. If you need to rest more or change your duties, I'm perfectly capable of fulfilling my responsibilities," she interrupted, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. "I never suggested otherwise," he replied calmly. "Merely expressing concern for your comfort," she softened. "I apologize, I'm not accustomed to such consideration. Your family, my stepmother primarily, she viewed my injury as an affront, as if I'd developed it specifically to embarrass her in society." Quentin made a sound of disgust. "Some people shouldn't be entrusted with the care of others." They reached the point where the path split one way leading to the creek, the other back to the ranch houses. "Thank you again for the lemonade," he said. "And Lorelai, I meant what I said before. Your leg doesn't define you, not to me, and it shouldn't to you either." Before she could respond, he turned and headed toward the creek, leaving her to ponder his words all the way back to the house. That evening, a summer storm broke the heat. Thunder rolled across the sky as rain lashed against the windows of the main house where Lorelai was preparing supper. She loved storms, the raw power of nature, the cleansing effect of the rain, the sense of renewal they brought. Quentin entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and something else, a tension she couldn't quite identify. "Storm's getting worse," he said, hanging his wet hat on a peg by the door. "Might be a long night." "I've always found storms rather exhilarating," she admitted, stirring the pot of stew on the stove. He raised an eyebrow. "Most women I've known find them frightening." "I'm not most women, Mr. Reed." "No," he agreed, his voice dropping slightly. "You certainly are not." The air between them seemed to crackle with the same electricity that lit up the sky outside. Lorelai busied herself with setting the table, acutely aware of his presence as he moved about the kitchen, getting drinks for their meal. They ate to the accompaniment of rain and thunder, the conversation flowing more easily than usual. Perhaps it was the storm, creating a sense of intimacy as they sat warm and dry while nature raged outside. But Lorelai found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought of in years, happy memories of her mother, adventures from her childhood, dreams she'd once harbored. Quentin listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. In turn, he spoke of his ambitions for the ranch, books he'd read, places he hoped to see someday. "I've always wanted to visit New York," Lorelai confessed. "To see the theaters, the museums, to walk among so many different kinds of people." "Perhaps you will someday," Quentin said. "The world has a way of opening up when you least expect it." Their eyes met across the table, and for a suspended moment, Lorelai felt as though he might reach for her hand. Instead, a particularly violent crack of thunder broke the spell, making her jump. "I should get back to my cabin before it gets worse," she said, rising to clear the dishes. "Leave those," Quentin instructed. "I'll see to them. Let me find you a lantern and oilcloth to keep you dry." The walk to her cabin was a breathless dash through the downpour, Quentin's hand steady at her elbow to prevent her from slipping in the mud. By the time they reached her porch, they were both soaked despite the oilcloth. "Thank you," she gasped, laughing as she pushed wet hair from her face. In the glow of the lantern, rain dripping from his hair and eyelashes, Quentin looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Lorelai," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. Yes, he seemed to wage some internal battle before stepping back. "Good night, sleep well." "Good night, Quentin." As she watched him stride back toward the main house, Disappearing into the curtain of rain, Lorelai pressed a hand to her chest where her heart raced with a feeling she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with Quentin Reed. The question was, what would she do about it? The storm passed, but the change in Lorelai and Quentin's relationship remained. There was a new awareness between them, evident in lingering glances, conversations that stretched into the evening, and small, thoughtful gestures on both sides. He brought her wildflowers from his rides. She baked his favorite apple pie without being asked. One afternoon in late July, Quentin announced he needed to travel to Denver on business. "I'll be gone 3 days," he explained over breakfast. "Samuel and Luke will see to the cattle and horses." "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Lorelai assured him, though the prospect of his absence left her feeling strangely bereft. "What business takes you to Denver, if I may ask?" "Banking matters primarily, and I need to order supplies for the coming winter." He hesitated. "Is there anything you would like me to bring back for you?" The question, so simple yet so considerate, touched her deeply. "Perhaps some fabric, if it's not too much trouble. I'd like to make new curtains for the cabin. Consider it done." "What color?" "Blue," she said without hesitation. "A sky blue," he nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Blue it is." Quentin departed early the next morning. Lorelai watched from her porch as he rode away, Ranger trotting alongside him for the first 100 yards before being called back. The ranch felt emptier without his presence, though she kept busy with her usual tasks. On the second day of his absence, Lorelai was hanging laundry when she heard the approach of horses. Thinking Quentin had returned early, she turned with a smile that quickly faded when she saw 3 unfamiliar riders approaching the main house. Setting down her basket, she made her way toward them, uncertainty slowing her steps. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and unshaven, with an air of menace that set her nerves on edge. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called as they dismounted. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Well. Reed's got himself a pretty little thing keeping house." "Mr. Reed isn't here," she said, lifting her chin. "If you have business with him, you'll need to return in a few days." The 3 men exchanged glances. "That's so," the leader drawled. "And who might you be, darlin'?" "Miss Bennett, Mr. Reed's housekeeper, and you are Jed Harker," he said with a mock bow. "Old acquaintance of Quentin Reed. These are my associates, Flynn and Russo." The other 2 men nodded, their eyes never leaving Lorelai in a way that made her want to retreat to her cabin and bolt the door. "Well, Mr. Harker, as I said, Mr. Reed is away on business. If you'd like to leave a message—" "Oh, I think we'll wait for him," Harker interrupted, stepping closer. "Been a long ride. Could use some hospitality." Lorelai took an involuntary step back. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Reed doesn't entertain visitors in his absence." Harker's face hardened. "Wasn't asking permission, Miss Bennett." Just then, Samuel and Luke appeared from the direction of the barn, both carrying rifles. "Everything all right, Miss Bennett?" Samuel called, his weathered face set in stern lines. Relief flooded through her. "These gentlemen were just leaving," she said firmly. Harker's eyes narrowed as he assessed the 2 armed ranch hands. After a tense moment, he touched the brim of his hat in a sardonic gesture. "Another time, then," he said. "Tell Reed that Harker sends his regards. And that I'll be seeing him real soon." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, but not before Harker gave Lorelai one last, lingering look that made her shudder. "You know those men, Samuel?" she asked once they were out of sight. The older ranch hand spat on the ground. "Jed Harker's bad news. Used to run with a gang that rustled cattle in these parts. Quentin helped the sheriff catch some of them years back. Harker got away, but he ain't forgotten. Should we be worried?" Samuel exchanged a glance with Luke. "We'll keep watch until the boss returns." "Best you stay close to the house, Miss Bennett." Lorelai spent an uneasy night, jumping at every sound. By morning she was exhausted but determined not to show fear. She went about her chores, though she heeded Samuel's advice and stayed near the buildings. Quentin returned late that afternoon, his expression darkening when Samuel immediately approached him with news of the visitors. Lorelai watched from the porch as the 2 men spoke, Quentin's posture growing increasingly tense. He strode directly to her cabin afterward, worry etched on his features. "Are you all right?" he demanded without preamble. Did Harker threaten you? I'm fine, she assured him. He was. Unpleasant, but Samuel and Luke arrived before anything happened. Quentin's jaw clenched. I should never have left you here. You couldn't have known they would come, she reasoned. And I wasn't alone. Samuel and Luke were here. He paced the small confines of her porch. Harker's dangerous. He blames me for the deaths of 2 of his men during a confrontation with the sheriff years ago. What will you do? Alert the sheriff in town, increase patrols of the property. He stopped pacing to look at her directly, and make sure you're never alone. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I can take care of myself, Quentin. I know you can, he said, his voice softening, but you shouldn't have to, not here, not under my protection. The word protection hung between them, charged with meaning neither of them was ready to articulate. I almost forgot, he said suddenly, reaching into his saddlebag. Your fabric. He handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the most beautiful blue fabric she had ever seen, not just sky blue as she had requested, but a rich, vibrant shade that reminded her of wildflowers and summer skies. It's perfect, she whispered, running her fingers over the soft cotton. Thank you. There's something else, he said, reaching again into his bag. He produced a book, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I noticed you enjoy reading poetry, thought you might like this. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. Quentin, this is, thank you. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Lorelai knew with absolute certainty that her feelings were not one-sided. Whatever was growing between them was mutual, precious, and increasingly difficult to ignore. The threat of Jed Harker loomed over the ranch in the following days, but there was no sign of him or his men. Quentin remained vigilant, often checking on Lorelai throughout the day and insisting on escorting her to her cabin each evening. One night, about a week after his return from Denver, they lingered on her porch longer than usual. The air was cooler, hinting at the approaching autumn, and the stars seemed especially bright. My father used to say you could read the future in the stars, Lorelai said, gazing upward. I never learned how, though. Perhaps some things are better left unknown, Quentin replied, his voice thoughtful. If we knew every joy and sorrow awaiting us, would we still choose to live each day fully? That's quite philosophical for a rancher, she teased gently. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Even ranchers have their contemplative moments. Indeed they do. She studied his profile in the moonlight, struck again by how handsome he was, especially when relaxed as he was now. Lorelai, he said suddenly, turning to face her. I've been meaning to ask you something, her heart quickened. Yes, your position here, are you content with it? The question wasn't what she'd expected. I am, more than content in fact, why do you ask? He seemed to choose his words carefully. Winter will be here before we know it. The work is different than harder in some ways, easier in others. I wanted to be sure you plan to stay. Are you offering me continued employment, Mr. Reed? She asked, reverting to formality to mask the sudden disappointment she felt. I'm asking if you want to stay, he said simply. There was something in his tone, something left unspoken, that made her pause. Yes, she said finally. I want to stay. Relief visibly washed over him. Good, that's. Good. They stood in silence for a moment, the night air charged with words neither seemed ready to say. I should let you rest, Quentin said eventually, stepping back. Good night, Lorelai. Good night, Quentin. As he walked away, Lorelai couldn't help feeling they'd missed an opportunity, though for what exactly, she wasn't sure. August brought the cattle drive a time of intense activity as Quentin and his men moved a portion of the herd to market in the nearest large town, some 30 miles away. Quentin would be gone for nearly a week, leaving Lorelai alone with just Samuel to watch over the ranch. Luke's coming with me, Quentin explained as he prepared to depart. Samuel will stay back, he knows to check on you regularly. If there's any sign of trouble, anything at all, he'll take you to town to stay with Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house. I'll be fine, Lorelai assured him, though the memory of Harker's threatening demeanor still made her uneasy. Just come back safely. I always do, he said with a confidence that both reassured and impressed her. The first few days of his absence passed uneventfully. Lorelai kept busy with her usual tasks, enjoying quiet evenings with her sewing and reading. Samuel checked on her morning and night as promised, but otherwise kept to himself. On the fourth day, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it torrential rain that turned the ground to mud and sent the creek over its banks. Lorelai watched from her window as the water rose steadily, wondering if the cattle drive was facing similar conditions. As evening approached, the storm intensified. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, followed by thunder that shook the walls of her small cabin. The wind howled around the eaves, rattling the windows in their frames. A particularly violent gust blew open her door, sending rain spattering across the floor. As Lorelai rushed to secure it, she caught sight of movement near the barn, a horse and rider approaching through the downpour. Her first thought was that Quentin had returned early, but as the figure drew closer, dread pooled in her stomach. Even through the curtain of rain, she recognized Jed Harker's tall form. Lorelai quickly closed and bolted her door, her mind racing. Samuel was staying in the bunkhouse, too far away to call for help. Her options were limited: hide, run, or confront. A pounding on her door made the decision for her. "Miss Bennett," Harker's voice called above the storm. "Open up, just want to talk, Mr. Harker, please leave," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Reed isn't here." "I know that," came the reply. "That's why I'm here. Got some unfinished business with Reed and you're going to help me settle it." Lorelai's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze landed on the iron poker by the stove. "I won't ask again," Harker threatened. "Open this door or I'll break it down." Moving as quietly as possible, Lorelai retrieved the poker and positioned herself beside the door. "What do you want from me?" she called, hoping to buy time. "You're coming with me, Miss Bennett. Reed took something from me, now I'm taking something from him." Terror gripped her, but she forced herself to think clearly. If she could somehow get to the main house, there was a shotgun in Quentin's study. But the distance seemed impossible in the storm, especially with her limp. Before she could formulate a plan, the door splintered under Harker's boot. He stood framed in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat and coat, a pistol in his hand. "There you are," he said with a cold smile. "Time to go, darlin'." Lorelai swung the poker with all her strength, catching him on the shoulder. He cursed, staggering back, but recovered quickly and lunged for her. They grappled briefly before his superior strength overwhelmed her. The poker clattered to the floor as he twisted her arm behind her back. "Feisty," he growled in her ear. "I like that. Let her go, Harker." The new voice came from outside. Lorelai's heart leapt at the sound. Quentin stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, his own pistol aimed steadily at Harker. "Well, well," Harker drawled, using Lorelai as a shield. "Look who's back early. Bad weather affect your cattle drive, Reed." "Let her go," Quentin repeated, his voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me." "She's my insurance," Harker replied, tightening his grip. "Drop your gun or she gets hurt." Lorelai caught Quentin's eye, saw the calculation there. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. In one fluid motion, she stomped hard on Harker's instep and drove her elbow into his stomach. As his grip loosened in surprise, she dropped to the floor, giving Quentin a clear shot. 2 gunshots rang out almost simultaneously. Harker's bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Quentin's head. Quentin's found its mark in Harker's shoulder, sending him crashing backward. Before he could recover, Quentin was on him, wresting the gun from his hand and delivering a blow that rendered him unconscious. Lorelai. Quentin was at her side in an instant, helping her to her feet, his hands moving over her as if to assure himself she was unharmed. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" "I'm all right," she gasped, trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Just shaken." His arms went around her then, pulling her against his chest in a fierce embrace that spoke more eloquently than words of his fear for her safety. Lorelai clung to him, her face pressed against his soaked shirt, inhaling the scent of rain and leather and him. "I thought," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw him enter your cabin, I thought I might be too late. You came back early," she murmured against his chest. "The storm was moving this way. I was worried about the creek flooding, about you being here alone." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his hands framing her face. "If anything had happened to you." The intensity in his eyes stole her breath. For a suspended moment, the storm, the unconscious man on her floor, the whole world outside the circle of his arms ceased to exist. Then Samuel appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, breaking the spell. "Boss, Miss Bennett, you all right?" Heard gunshots. He stopped short at the sight of Harker. "Well, I'll be damned." "Get some rope, Samuel," Quentin instructed, reluctantly releasing Lorelai. "We're taking Mr. Harker to the sheriff tonight." The journey to town was grueling, 5 miles through storm-lashed darkness with Harker bound and sullen across his horse. By the time they delivered him to the sheriff with a full account of his crimes, dawn was breaking through dispersing clouds. "You two look like you could use some rest," the sheriff observed after taking their statements. "The hotel's got rooms available if you want to stay in town." Quentin glanced at Lorelai, noting her exhaustion. "That might be wise. We can head back to the ranch after we've had some sleep." The Prairie Rose Hotel was modest but clean, offering a hot bath that Lorelai gratefully accepted. Afterward, wrapped in a borrowed robe, she sat on the edge of the bed in her room, combing out her damp hair and reflecting on the night's events. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. "Lorelai, it's Quentin." She opened the door to find him similarly refreshed, his hair still damp from his own bath, wearing a clean shirt provided by the hotel. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, his eyes moving over her with concern. "How are you feeling?" "Better after the bath," she admitted. "Though I'm still a bit shaken, understandably so." He hesitated. "May I come in? Just for a moment." She stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly conscious of her state of undress beneath the robe. He seemed equally aware, keeping a respectful distance as he moved to the window. "The sheriff says Harker will stand trial for attempted kidnapping, along with his previous crimes," he informed her. "He won't trouble us again." "That's a relief." She sat on the edge of the bed, still working the comb through her tangled hair. Quentin watched her for a moment, then crossed to where she sat. "May I?" he asked, gently taking the comb from her hand. Surprised but curious, Lorelai nodded. He moved behind her and began to carefully comb through her hair, his touch impossibly gentle. "My mother used to do this for my sisters," he explained softly, "before she died." "You never mentioned having sisters," Lorelai said, closing her eyes at the soothing sensation. "Two. Both married now, living in Missouri. We write occasionally." "You're full of surprises, Quentin Reed," he chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "As are you, Lorelai Bennett. Not many women would have faced down Jed Harker with a fireplace poker." "I wasn't going to let him take me without a fight," his hands stilled in her hair. "Your courage is remarkable." She turned to face him, their faces now inches apart. "As is yours, you came back for me." "I will always come back for you," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Always." The word hung between them, heavy with promise. Lorelai's heart hammered in her chest as Quentin's gaze dropped to her lips. "Lorelai," he murmured, "I need to tell you something." "Yes," he set the comb aside, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. "When I hired you, I offered you a position as my housekeeper, but these past months you've become so much more than that." She held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "I find myself thinking of you constantly," he continued. "Your smile, your laugh, the way you face every challenge with such grace and determination. I've tried to maintain a proper distance, to be respectful of your position, but tonight when I thought I might lose you." "Quentin," she whispered, placing her hand over his. "I feel the same way." Relief and joy transformed his features. "You do? How could I not? You saw me when I was abandoned, offered me not just employment but dignity. You've never once made me feel less because of my limp. You've treated me with respect and kindness. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The words, once spoken, hung in the air between them like a tangible thing, beautiful, fragile, and irrevocable. "I love you too," he said, the admission seeming to lift a weight from him. "God help me, I've tried not to, tried to remember you deserve better than a rough rancher with calloused hands and little to offer beyond hard work and devotion. But I can't fight it anymore. Your hands," she said, taking them in hers, "are exactly what I want. Strong enough to build a life from nothing, gentle enough to comfort me when I'm afraid. What more could I possibly ask for?" With a groan that seemed torn from his very soul, Quentin pulled her into his arms and finally kissed her. His lips were soft yet insistent against hers, conveying months of restrained longing and newfound hope. Lorelai responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck as she gave herself over to the kiss she had dreamed of for so long. When they parted, both breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words more plea than question. "Be my wife, my partner, my heart." Tears of joy sprang to Lorelai's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her again, this time with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "We should probably get some rest," he said reluctantly, pulling away. "It's been a long night. Stay with me," she requested softly. "Just to hold me. After everything that's happened, I don't want to be alone." Quentin hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll stay." They lay together on the narrow hotel bed, her back against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. The intimacy was new but felt utterly right, as if they had always been meant to find this comfort in each other. "When we get back to the ranch," Quentin murmured against her hair, "I'll speak to the reverend about performing the ceremony. Unless you want to wait, have a proper wedding." "I don't need anything elaborate," Lorelai assured him. "Just you, me, and whatever friends you'd like to invite." "Samuel and Luke will want to be there," he said. "And I'll send word to my sisters, though they may not be able to travel such a distance on short notice. Perhaps we could visit them someday," she suggested, already imagining a future where such journeys would be possible. "We can go anywhere you like," he promised. "Denver, St. Louis, even New York if you still want to see it. Anywhere is fine as long as we're together." He tightened his arm around her. "Get some sleep, my love. Tomorrow we go home." As Lorelai drifted towards sleep, warm and secure in Quentin's embrace, she marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short months. From abandoned and desperate to loved and cherished, from alone to belonging, she was not left anymore. She was found, chosen, beloved. And that made all the difference. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a perfect September afternoon. The ranch was at its most beautiful, with wildflowers still dotting the meadows and the aspen trees beginning to turn gold against the evergreens. Quentin had insisted on building a proper wedding arch, which now stood in the yard between the main house and Lorelai's cabin, festooned with flowers and ribbons. Samuel and Luke had outdone themselves preparing for the celebration, cleaning and decorating with an enthusiasm that touched Lorelai deeply. Mrs. Peterson from town had arrived early to help Lorelai dress and prepare, bringing with her a gift of handmade lace for her veil. "Never seen a man more in love than your Quentin," the older woman observed as she pinned the veil to Lorelai's upswept hair. "The way he looks at you would make any woman envious." Lorelai smiled, happiness making her radiant. "I'm very fortunate. Seems to me he's the fortunate one, Mrs." Peterson replied with a wink. "Now, let's get you in this dress." The dress was a marvel ordered from Denver by Quentin as a surprise. Simple yet elegant, its ivory satin complemented Lorelai's fair coloring perfectly. When she was fully dressed, Mrs. Peterson stepped back with tears in her eyes. "Beautiful," she declared. "Absolutely beautiful." A knock at the door announced Samuel's arrival. "Reverend's here, Miss Bennett. We're ready when you are." Lorelai took a deep breath. "I'm ready." The small gathering awaiting her included the Reverend, Luke, a few neighbors from nearby ranches, and the sheriff who had helped them with Harker. But Lorelai had eyes only for Quentin, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his face alight with love as she walked toward him. He took her hands in his as she reached him, his voice a reverent whisper. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple gold bands and vows they had written themselves. Lorelai's voice trembled with emotion as she promised to stand by Quentin through all of life's joys and challenges, to be his partner, his comfort, and his greatest supporter. Quentin's vows moved her to tears. "Lorelai, when I found you standing alone in Silverdale Creek, I told you that you weren't left anymore. What I didn't know then was that I was the one who had been waiting for you, for the love and light you would bring into my life. I promised to cherish you every day, to respect you as my equal, to build our dreams together, and to never, ever leave you behind. By the power vested in me," the Reverend concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Reed, you may kiss your bride." Quentin didn't hesitate. pulling Lorelai into an embrace that conveyed all the love and commitment he had just pledged. The small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but the newlyweds were lost in their own world, finding in each other's eyes the promise of the future they would share. The celebration afterward was joyous, a feast prepared by Mrs. Peterson and the neighboring women. Music provided by Luke, who proved surprisingly talented with a fiddle, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Even Samuel, normally so reserved, joined in the festivities, offering a toast to the couple that brought fresh tears to Lorelai's eyes. As the sun began to set, casting the land in golden light, Quentin led Lorelai away from the celebration toward the main house, their house now. "Are you happy, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "And you? I have everything I could ever want," he assured her, placing a tender kiss on her forehead, "and so much more than I deserve." "I disagree," she said, stopping to face him fully. "You deserve every happiness, Quentin, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." He gathered her close, his expression serious. "When your family left you in Silverdale Creek, they made the greatest mistake of their lives. But I can't help being grateful for it, because it brought you to me." "Perhaps some things are meant to be," Lorelai mused, thinking of all the circumstances that had led to this moment. "Perhaps we were always meant to find each other." "I believe we were," Quentin agreed, "and I intend to make the most of every moment we have together." With that promise, he swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. Into the future they would build together, a future founded on love, respect, and the unshakable certainty that neither of them would ever be left behind again. 5 years later, Lorelai stood on the porch of the main house, watching as Quentin taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew, due to arrive with the spring. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Quentin's cattle business had expanded, and Lorelai had started a small side business breeding and training horses, discovering a natural talent for working with the animals. Her legs still troubled her at times, especially in cold weather, but it had never once been an impediment to her happiness or success. "Mama, look," Thomas called excitedly as the pony trotted in a small circle, his father's hand steady on the lead rope. "I'm riding, I see you, my brave boy." She called back, her heart full at the sight of her son's joy and her husband's pride. Their life together hadn't been without challenges. 2 harsh winters had tested their resources and resolve. A drought the previous summer had threatened the cattle. And most painfully, they had lost their first child, a daughter, shortly after birth during their 2nd year of marriage. But through it all, they had faced every hardship together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. Quentin had been her rock during their time of grief, and she had been his anchor when difficulties with the ranch had nearly overwhelmed him. They were truly partners in every sense of the word. As if sensing her thoughts, Quentin looked up and met her gaze across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that look still made her heart skip a beat. He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face in a way that had once been rare but now came easily and often. "Should we show Mama how we can go a little faster?" he asked Thomas, who nodded enthusiastically. Lorelai laughed as the pony picked up speed, her son's delighted giggles carrying on the crisp autumn air. This was her life now, filled with love, purpose, and the family she had always longed for but never thought she would have. Later that evening, after Thomas was tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Lorelai and Quentin sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him, his free hand gently caressing her rounded belly. "I received a letter today," she said, breaking the companionable silence. "From my father." Quentin's hand stilled. "What did he want?" "To apologize, primarily. It seems my stepmother has passed away, and he's had time to reflect on his actions. He asked if he might visit, meet his grandson and the new baby when it arrives." "How do you feel about that?" Quentin asked carefully. Lorelai considered the question. 5 years ago, I would have said no without hesitation. I was so hurt, so angry at being abandoned. And now Now I understand that sometimes people make terrible mistakes out of weakness or fear. It doesn't excuse what he did, but—" She placed her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. "Life is too precious, too short to hold on to bitterness, and I want our children to know their grandfather, flawed as he is." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then we'll welcome him on whatever terms you're comfortable with." "Thank you," she murmured, once again grateful for his unwavering support. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," he replied with a smile in his voice, "but I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Quentin Reed, more with each passing day." He turned to face her, his expression serious despite his smile. "And I love you, Lorelai Reed. You gave me not just a family, but a home in the truest sense of the word. Before you, this was just a ranch. Now it's where we belong. Together," she added, leaning in to kiss him softly. "Together," he agreed. "Always." As they sat in the gathering darkness, the warmth of their love a shield against the autumn chill, Lorelai reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that desperate day in Silverdale Creek to this moment of contentment, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She had been left behind, yes. But in being left, she had found her way home to Quentin, to this land, to the life they had built together. And she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her here, to this perfect moment under the stars with the man who had seen her value when she had forgotten it herself. She wasn't left anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be.